Hi, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we've been getting up to in lockdown for the last year. So we haven't obviously been able to go to the shows and rallies that we would normally be going to, so instead we've kept ourselves busy at home working on the cars we've got, and we have also bought and sold a few cars, so I'll go through them with you as well. The start of 2020, Tom was working on his Morris Minor van. He just finished pretty much a 2.5-year restoration with the aim of getting her to the Practical Classics restoration show in March, but obviously with COVID that didn't end up happening, so annoyingly he hasn't really been able to use her much, but it did mean he had a bit of extra time just to get the finishing touches done, just to make sure she was running perfectly and all was good. So that was the first job of lockdown. And then Tom decided he needed to sell a few cars, so the first car to go was his 1972 Triumph Gt6. It was a bit of a project, needed a bit of work, but it was just sort of too much with us with everything else that was going on. So that went in March last year, and then with the money from that Tom decided he needed a new everyday car, just something a bit more reliable, which is when the 1987 Saab 900i came along. So we've had that for just over a year now. Then my Triumph Spitfire needed a bit of work. The clutch was starting to slip, so Tom offered to take it all apart and have a look at that. So that was over about a week. We were sort of taking that apart and fixing all the things that needed fixing on that. And it was around that time that I found a Hillman Minx come up for sale, which I'd been after for a little while. So it was a 1959 convertible Hillman Minx. So I bought her in May last year, and then because of that, obviously with space, the Spitfire had to go. So she was next one to go, and then that was followed closely by a 1966 Austin A60 Cambridge that Tom had. That was sold in June to a friend last year. Then we didn't buy or sell anything for a little while. I don't think it was until October that the next car went, which was Tom's 1972 Triumph 2000 Estate. So the 3 Triumphs we had actually all went last year, but they were all good fun while we had them. And then obviously lots of work was getting done on the cars in the meantime. Nothing major, but just sort of a bit of maintenance just to keep the cars running and on the road. And then in November time, Tom had been after an MGB for a while. We'd actually been after either an MGB or a Land Rover, and in the end decided on the MGB. So in November we managed to find that one. I think it's 1972 MGB GT with a sunroof, which is good fun. So that came in November, and then typically in December Tom had a friend with a Land Rover Series 3, and it was basically agreed that Tom would take it off his hands, so Tom bought that off him in December last year, so he ended up with an MGB and a Land Rover at the same time. The MGB hasn't needed too much work. Tom's put a new sill on it and done a bit of welding, and it's got a new boot lid, which is currently bracken orange colour, so it's not right, but it will obviously eventually be painted green along with the sill and everything else that needs sort of touching up. And then the next job, I think, was my Wolseley was quite a big job. She'd always leaked oil since I'd had her, and the oil pressure light sort of flickered when she was hot at idle. So I managed to source a new engine, and that was a bit of a task to get that in. But Tom did all that for me, which was brilliant, so now she doesn't leak any oil, which is brilliant. And then I suppose the biggest job now that we're working on is the Land Rover. Tom's done lots of welding to that, so I'll give you a little bit of a tour around it and show you where he's welded the chassis and the floors. It didn't originally have floors intact, so that's all been done now, and various other bits and pieces. So the Land Rover is the current car in the garage. It's getting lots of work done. We've had to remove the roof off it so that it can fit in the garage because it was slightly too tall otherwise. That's currently hiding over there on top of the trailer tent. We've had the front end completely disassembled, both wings and everything's come off recently, so that's why we still haven't got the grille back on, because we only actually put the wings and bonnet back on yesterday. But that's all had to come off because the chassis needed a lot of welding, so Tom's completely welded the chassis on the front end in other places that it was needed. And also somewhere that it needed a lot of work was the sills and the floors. So, I mean, this side didn't actually originally have a sill, so that's all now been fitted. Tom's ordered the part and that's all been sorted. And the floor was completely rotten before. So that's all now been fixed and sorted so that we can actually stand up and get in the car properly. So that's all looking good. Obviously, it's a Land Rover, so it's used and abused. But that's sort of how we like it. We were told by the owner who sold it that we weren't allowed to clean it, which obviously Tom's agreed to. It was a good friend of his that sold it to him. So that's all part of the deal. Tom has also replaced all the braking components, so he's replaced all the brake lines, drums, shoes, cylinders, as the brakes were sort of all locked on and just not working, and it was just sort of a bit of a mess, but that's all okay now. We took it for a brief little test drive yesterday, and they're still sticking a little bit, so I'll look into that, but it's actually very close to being ready for an MOT now, which is very exciting. So that'll be really good. So one of the biggest changes for us in 2020 was sorting out the garden. I say sorting out, it's still not sourced out, it's just our sort of yard at the minute, there's no grass currently. But we originally had a garage tent in the back garden here, which sort of took up quite a lot of space, and you could only obviously fit the 2 cars in, whereas here, as you can see now, we managed to squeeze 3 cars in here, which is absolutely brilliant. The main difference was originally there was a large bush here that came out, so it was really wide, where we've now got a fence. So that obviously cleared a lot of room in the garden, and that went all the way round the edge of the garden. So that meant that we had more room to put the shed up. We dug, I think it was about 30 tonnes of soil out of the garden. So it was all sloped before, so we've managed to flatten it all out. Excuse the temporary patio area, there will be a proper patio there hopefully by this summer. So we dug, like I say, 30 tonnes of soil out, and then we had to concrete the base. We did that ourselves with the help of a neighbour who has done it many years ago. He managed to teach us how to do it, so me and Tom both gave that a go, which was quite fun. We've now also got the rubber matting on the floor, which is great. So yeah, we've obviously Tom's got his temporary, he's got a van at the minute where he sort of works out the back of with all his tools in. We've now got fences that enclose all the cars in, which is brilliant because there was no sort of security before. And yes, there's, like I say, still a lot of work to do, but we're getting there. It will get done eventually. I'll bring you around here. We do have also a half of a car. We've got a Morris Minor back end, which is, we actually drove it, we bought it last year and ended up helping, a lot of the parts from this went into Tom's van, including the engine and lots of other bits, but unfortunately it was just too rotten to do anything else with, so we've kept the back end, and that will eventually be turned into a barbecue. Obviously it doesn't look much at the minute, but that is the plan for it eventually. So yeah, the biggest thing, like I say, is just the shed, which means we can now keep the 3 cars in there protected, which is brilliant. I have started to put up a few signs in it. You probably won't be able to see because it's quite dark, but got a couple of signs up at the back there, and I've got a whole box of stuff in the house, of stuff that automobilia and stuff I've collected over the years that's still to go up and decorate in here with. So I'm looking forward to that.